Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and this is episode 339, and we're going to talk about honest scales to measure value. So back in episode 79, I did an episode, well, this is based on that one, right? But I edited it a little bit. But episode 79, if you haven't heard it, it was about year and a half ago that I uploaded that. And I think it was one of the first sermons that I had uploaded. I'm going to leave all the Jesus stuff out, so you don't turn off the episode yet. But it was based on a passage in Leviticus that's in the Hebrew scriptures or Old Testament, chapter 19, verses 35 to 37. And there it talks about honest scales. And so, gold closed today at $3,049. And as I checked right before I hit record, it was $3,050. And silver closed at $33.81. It's now $33.74. And people are saying, and it was playing around with $34 all day. And some people are saying that if the pattern holds, it will go past $35 an ounce and hit $39 an ounce. And once it hits 39, who knows where it will go. You can listen to Vince Lanci in Arcadia Economics, and he does like the free version of the podcast has a bit of technical analysis, and he explains it so much better. I just watch the numbers, right? And he seems to know what he's talking about. And there are other people who are in line and saying things similar. So I thought, hey, I generally don't do this, but why not, you know, talk about honest scales again? Um, in other words, I'm not going to talk about necessarily gold and silver from a technical or economics standpoint, but just a layman, not going to use the Austrian regression theory, but just I'm going to just start with a question, right? Why does the Bible talk about scales, not gold and silver, scales? Okay. And so with that question, just kind of go from there. And basically, that's all the Bible references that I'll be making for the rest of this episode. Okay. So, so basically, this is something I would typically say in a classroom type setting at a secular university. So, commodities were the original money, right? And you had to measure how much of the commodity that you had, right? So if you're selling salt, well, how much does it weigh? If you're selling wheat, well, how much does it weigh, right? Measure in some way. You can measure camels by counting them, right? But you need to have some sort of scale, a fair scale, a universal scale to ensure that you're getting your money's worth. So imagine if the scales were dishonest, like you had your thumb on the scale, or and if you know scales from back in the day, like Labry, Blind Justice, she's holding up a set of scales, and it's basically a balance with two little sort of cup things that are holding materials, right? So on the one side, you put a weight, and on the other side, you put in whatever commodity or whatever it is that you're buying or selling. And so the weights that you are putting to see uh, how much something weighs has to be honest, right? Can you imagine if you just shaved something off or added some weight to the little weights that you are using for your scales? You can cheat, right? So, in other words, if you're using dishonest scales, you can get more for less, and that would give you an edge, all right? And it's dishonest gain. So, I would imagine that if there were differences, it would have to be extremely slight. Otherwise, people would notice or people would mind, right? So the amount that you would gain, the edge that you would gain would have to happen over time, a little bit over time, but eventually it adds up to quite a lot. Moving forward in time, we don't use scales any longer. Now we have currency. All right, I skipped a few steps, but we have currency, right? The paper substitute, right? Paper, rather than carrying around gold and silver, because eventually it became gold and silver. That was what was money for thousands of years. So rather than carrying around gold or silver or bushels of grain, a bunch of camels, we carry paper, notes, right? This is supposed to be evidence that you have something of value somewhere else. So in a way, the currency that we carry around, the paper or, whatever form of paper that you're carrying, like a credit card or whatever, the currency represents the scale to measure value, right? You get it? I hope that transition was not too dramatic, right? And I went over a couple thousand years there. But imagine instead of carrying around weights and a scale, right, we are just carrying around paper. Makes it a lot easier. And the denominations on the paper are basically telling you the value of what you're buying and selling. But without a real scale, right, it's just paper that can be easily inflated, it becomes easier to cheat. So inflation, yes, inflation is tax, but inflation is the cheat. It's a dishonest scale. So with very little work, you can create more paper. You can create more dollars. And so very little work is required to create the cheat. And now it's digital, which makes it even easier, right? So the scale or the unit of measure, the unit that we're supposed to use to measure value is fake. It's fake. It's a cheat. So dollars are supposed to measure value, but the scale itself is always changing through inflation. And people have come to believe this fakery, right? This lie because of coercion, monopoly, right? Monopoly on the currency and money printing, and indoctrination, right? So you can go to pretty much any school today, public school, or even private school, and talking about fiat as opposed to a gold standard or gold backing or whatever, people just kind of look at you funny, right? Uh, Nevertheless, people mostly believe the lie, and so they work for dollars, right? People do what they do or what is required to earn dollars. But because it's a dishonest scale, those dollars can be produced without limit, right? So dollars no longer represent much of anything, right? They're just numbers on a cotton paper, right? But because it's the reserve currency, dollars have become the reserve currency, people need it to buy goods, right? Uh, and that's why they're trying to de-dollarize. But basically, if I were to simplify, if you wanted to buy anything from one country to another country, you had to use dollars, right? You had to, if you wanted to buy crude oil from OPEC, you had to do it in dollars. And in order to get the dollars, you had to sell stuff to America. Sell stuff, they pay you in dollars. And with those dollars, you go buy the things that you need. So there's a demand on the dollars, and dollars become the scale for the world. But this scale can be produced without limit, right? So when I'm not producing anything and buying or selling much of anything, right? So we're just buying with printed dollars, right? But there's no trade, right? So I talk about trade a lot in this channel, that you have something I want, I have something you want, we trade. All right. And since it's done on a national scale, there's usually going to be someone in this country that's producing something that someone in your country wants, and we trade. But now people sell us stuff not for goods, but for paper, right? And so, yes, I know this goes against a lot of the things that Republicans and Donald Trump has been saying, right? And is more in line with like Peter Schiff, where we actually benefit from this trade deficit, right? People are selling us their real goods and we're giving them paper, Okay. And we can produce this paper because it's now digital with no limit, which basically means bribery has no limit. Spending and debt have no limit, right? Because I can keep printing this all day long. I mean, I can just keep adding zeros on my computer all day long. You can bribe educators, you can bribe politicians, you can bribe doctors, pharmaceutical companies, you can bribe entire countries. I don't know, we can call it Ukraine or something, right? And basically bribe everyone to go along. If you can bribe the United States, right? With all the stimmy checks during the lockdowns, right? Stay at home. Why would I stay at home? Well, I'll pay you to stay at home. Okay. That was a bribe. Okay. So bribery now has no limit, right? Oh, we need a couple $1 trillion to bribe that country. Uh, Wait a second. Okay, go. Right? That's how long it takes to put all those zeros after a one or a two or a three, and now you've created trillions of dollars. Right? So spending and debt have no limit any longer, and it doesn't measure anything anymore, right? So that's why, particularly in religious circles or scripture emphasizes not using dishonest scales because now you are distorting the measure of value, right? You're distorting the measure of profit, which also means you are distorting the measure of morality. And I talked about that in the Joe Rogan episode I did, episode 310, I guess. So how bad is the distortion? All right, this is how bad it is. In 1970, the average wage was $9,500, right? In 1970, the average wage in America was 9,500. And with that $9,500, you could buy a house, buy a car, send your kids to college, right? All of that. It was pretty nice, okay? Now, in 1970, we were still on the gold standard, and gold was and if we value gold at $42.22, that comes out to be about 225 ounces of gold. $9,500 was 225 ounces in gold. In today's valuation, right, today's close, make it simple, $3,000, right? 225 ounces at $3,000 an ounce, that's $675,000. In other words, to have the same kind of lifestyle that you had in 1970, you need to be making about 670, we'll make it, we'll round it down, $600,000 a year, right? The difference between 9,500 and 600,000 today, the difference, which is about $590,000, is what was stolen through inflation. Okay, this is just non-economics, non-business school, humanities, scripture-based understanding of theft. All right. That's why taxation is theft, or another reason to say that taxation is theft, right? I mean, that's how much was stolen. So a lot of people who make $200,000 a year, yeah, you are not living nearly as well as people did in 1970. Sure, the tech has changed a little bit. They didn't have computers back in the day. They had typewriters, right? Uh, but still, right? You could send your kids to college without crushing debt. You can buy, and your wife didn't have to work, or one of the two parents did not have to work. All right. So what we need now is we need a true scale again. Is reset the answer? Is a revaluation of gold the answer? No. And the reason why we need to have a true scale again, because we need to understand value, right? And that's one of the biggest subjective things, where subjective theory of value shows that everything, all the value of anything is seen differently by different people, right? So value for me is not value for thee. Dishonest scales make it easier to ignore truth or real value. Honest scales makes cheating harder. Like you can't inflate. Like, oh, yo, we got to bribe all those people in that country. We need a couple trillion dollars. Okay. Do you have the gold? No. Well, then you can't do it, right? You understand what I'm saying? Like, if we are tied by a real, honest scale, not dollars, but maybe ounces of gold or ounces of silver, whatever, it makes it near difficult to cheat, right? Honest scales make cheating harder. So fewer people would be tempted and chase inflated dollars, right? Uh, what is truer than other things, right? So you have a choice. What do you believe? Well, they all kind of seem a little problematic. Well, then we go with what is least problematic, right? We try to discover what is better, what is good, what is moral, what is truly valuable, right? And even if you think you've found what is truly valuable or good, well, that's only temporary, right? Because you're changing, you're getting older. And so what you see as value or valuable is changing with every single day, every passing moment. And so again, you have to continue the search for value. And then you might find it something more valuable, but then you keep on going. But it's not just you, it's the entire society with honest scales. You're looking for things which are better. Now, personal preference will say that a lot of people will make compromises. They'll say, oh, I like this and it's really cheap, so I'm going to buy lots of it. And other people say, well, I value this, but it's really expensive, but it's what I think is valuable. And so that's what you're going to go pursue. Okay. But all of us collectively living for our own goals, personal goals, right? What is valuable and what is less valuable, generally speaking, is revealed as long as we have an honest scale. And so, how do we know if something is better or worse, right? In the process of discovering what is better than something else, you have to use, or at least what I use, is hypocrisy and coercion. Is what you are pursuing coercive? Is what you are pursuing hypocritical? If the answer is yes for either of them or both of them, then you got to keep looking, right? It's not true value. Anything that is unjust does not have real value. And so once you have a honest scale, so the dollars are honest too, because they're tied to gold, well, then now you're going to look for work that gives you honest money, right? You're going to pursue value, which means that you're going to create more prosperity for more people. Doge uncovered a lot of or at least a little bit. I mean, and even that little bit was devastating for a lot of people, but Doge uncovered what happens with inflation. They're funding things which are artificially popular, artificially trendy. They don't actually have the popularity and the value that it would absent inflation, absent twisted, broken scales, right? You wouldn't be able to fund war. You wouldn't be able to fund warlords, dictators, gain of function research, et cetera, et cetera. Like without the ability to cheat, to print dollars, you can't fund all of these things. Or if you did try, it would be revealed very quickly that these are not good ideas. But it doesn't stop there, right? Our time preference changes, right? We have low time preference versus high time preference. High time preference means that I need to have it now, right? I need it now. And low time preference means, oh, I'll put it aside for later, which leads to investing, right? And investing also becomes better because you're no longer chasing yield or speculative bubbles, right? Because the money is honest now. You don't have to worry about or do be too concerned about the get rich quick thing, which usually a lot of people who are not insiders always get burned. But in order to do this, we need a scale, a reliable scale to find value, to determine value, to be able to compare, to figure out what is in fact worthless, right? And once we realize that certain things are in fact worthless, not worth our time and money, when we stop wasting time chasing after low value things, perhaps like humanities degrees. And I say that as a humanities PhD, but right, a lot of the things that people are pursuing, there's very low value. Look, and I said this before. My dad, who is a PhD, told me getting a PhD means you're probably going to be poor. I knew that, and I accepted that fate, which also made it really hard to get married. But anyway, that's another story. But, you know, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it because you're pursuing value of a different kind, right? And once you realize low value things are everywhere, well, you're going to take the time to figure out what are the high value things. And so your time preferences are lower and you start looking to the future. The lower your time preference is, the further into the future that you are looking. And so it used to be that people would save up for the sake of their children, right? And so that's what you're saving for, not for necessarily for yourself, but for your children. With better scales, bad choices are really bad and very, very obvious. And so when someone says, oh, let's do this crazy thing, it's easy to walk away from. There's more value in peace rather than war, right? And so right now people keep throwing around this idea of war so casually, right? Because they don't see just how destructive and worthless and regressive war is. And then you begin to see the value in peace instead. Harmony, not violence, because violence, and I've said this before many times, violence is expensive. And so then people will choose to strive for harmony. Right now, it seems that gold and silver might be the best bet for a scale to find value. But right now, the scale is not measuring anything. It's just a rock, right? Or an element, right? Sitting in vaults somewhere, right? It's not measuring anything, right? So nothing, well, directly anyway. It's not, so the scale of gold and silver is not being used to measure the cost of a car, the cost of a college education, the cost of war, for example. Now, some people are saying the scale is coming back, maybe with an audit, perhaps, but who knows if there's anything in Fort Knox anymore. I just heard someone today that there was a gold auditing service, whatever, or they monitor gold news, and they said that the gold in Fort Knox has been sold a long time ago. I don't know. Maybe that's true. Maybe everything's there. It's just that the U.S. doesn't own it anymore, but hopefully the scale does come back. We'll be able to start measuring things for real. And then people will begin to realize that a lot of the things that they were advocating for, that they were chasing and supporting, are worthless or not. Hey, a professor can dream. And I'm just going to leave it there for this episode, and I'll talk to you next time.